And hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Up in the Watershed. It's the webinar series of the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. My name is Heather Stapleton. I'm one of three community engagement coordinators for the National Estuary Program. Today, we have a special guest with us. One, it's super special because this week we are celebrating National Estuaries Week. So this couldn't have come at a more perfect time on the calendar. And Olivia Escandell is with us. She is the Senior Conservation Manager for the Restore Our Shores program. That is a restoration program out of Brevard Zoo. They're not housed at the zoo itself. They have their own location and they work all over Brevard County out in the lagoon. They need volunteers all the time for different kinds of projects. And today, Olivia is going to be talking to us about seagrass restoration projects in the Indian River Lagoon. So with that, Olivia, I think I'll have you take it away. Do you have control?
Let me see. I think so. Let's see.
Just a little bit of reminder, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that while Olivia is presenting. And if you don't have a chance to watch all of this live with us, it will get posted on YouTube as well. So be on the lookout for that. And please share this with other people that might like to know a little bit more about what's going on in the seagrass restoration world.
All right. I think that I have the ability to share now. Make sure I pick the right screen. All right. Does that look good, Heather? That's good. Okay, so not present. Okay, great. Well, as Heather said, my name is Olivia Escandell. I'm a senior conservation manager at the Brevard Zoo. I've been at the zoo since 2017, and I actually grew up right here in Brevard County in Melbourne. So spent a lot of time on the Indian River Lagoon, and I like to say I have my absolute dream job. So I get to work with the community out in the lagoon, helping to bring back some of the resources that I got to enjoy as a child. So a little bit of background about the zoo. Probably a lot of people on this webinar are familiar with the Brevard Zoo. We are located in Melbourne, Florida, and we have a strong history of volunteerism and bringing the community together. Our mission is we share our joy of nature to help wildlife and people thrive. And that really started from the zoo's inception. So this year is actually the Brevard Zoo's 30th anniversary. So in 1994, community members in Brevard County came together to build the zoo by hand. So we hold the Guinness World Record for the largest community zoo build. We may be the only community built zoo, but we like to hold on to that title. And ever since then, we have really been bringing the community together to help answer the call for local wildlife in our own backyard. Some programs that you may be familiar with are our Sea Turtle Healing Center or the captive breeding programs that we have for Perdido key beach mice and Florida grasshopper sparrows. But one of the loudest calls in our own backyard has been for the Indian River Lagoon. So as Heather mentioned, one of the conservation programs at the Brevard Zoo is our Restore Our Shores program, which I help oversee with an amazing team. And our mission in the Restore Our Shores program is to work with the community to restore habitats in the Indian River Lagoon. So over the past 10 years of this program, we've engaged 70,000 volunteers in restoring oyster reefs, clam beds, mangroves and other living shoreline species along the Indian River Lagoon, mostly in Brevard County. We have done some projects outside of Brevard, but definitely very focused in our own backyard here in Brevard County, helping to bring back these habitats that improve water quality conditions in the lagoon, like our filter feeders and other habitats that help to provide homes for many animals in the lagoon. And these projects are made possible through funding mostly from Brevard County's Save Our Indian River Lagoon project plan, but also through different funding sources like St. John's River Water Management District and especially the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. So I feel like I don't really need to go too deep into this based on the audience. Probably many of you know that we have suffered significant losses of seagrass in the Indian River Lagoon since the super bloom in 2011. But I did wanted to provide some context for those who may not be as familiar with Brevard County. Seagrass was widespread throughout the Indian River Lagoon in Brevard County. As I mentioned, I grew up enjoying a lot of these seagrass beds with my family. But it's changed a lot in even just my short lifetime. So we have not seen seagrass come back in most portions of Brevard County, except for some regions very, very far north in the northern IRL in the Scottsmore and Titusville area, and also in Banana River. So we're starting to see some glimmers of hope in those areas, which is very exciting, but nothing like the recovery that they've seen in the Mosquito Lagoon. So why did the zoo start to get involved in seagrass restoration? Well, if you would have asked our executive director, Keith Winston, 5 years ago, if the zoo would ever be involved in seagrass, he would tell you absolutely not. That is terrifying because seagrass restoration is scary. We're still battling water quality issues in the Indian River Lagoon. These issues haven't changed overnight. And we're not going to be able to plant our way out of this problem. But we can do some pilot projects to engage the community and start to answer some questions about seagrass restoration so that as seagrass growing conditions in the lagoon improve, we can be prepared for large scale restoration projects. So our first pilot project was started in 2020. We received some funds from the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program to launch what we call our Grasses in Classes project. So we partnered with 2 local Brevard County high schools to set up seagrass growing tanks in their classrooms so that we could grow seagrass to be planted out in the Indian River Lagoon. And then we would work with those high school students to monitor the seagrass and see how it was performing. We set up those tanks in I think it was the Friday before spring break in 2020. And some of you might remember what happened during spring break. The kids never came back to school because of the COVID pandemic. So unfortunately, we were not able to grow seagrass in those classrooms like we had hoped, but we were able to pivot like many different organizations did during that time to make sure that their projects got done. We were still able to do good work in the lagoon. So we partnered with another organization, Florida Oceanographic Society, that had an established seagrass nursery down south in Fort Pierce, and they were able to provide us seagrass that we were still able to plant at a site in Melbourne Beach at Maritime Hammock. It's an environmentally endangered lands property down in Melbourne Beach. We were still able to work with high school students because we actually partnered with our zoo teams here at the Brevard Zoo to help us monitor. So we planted that project around the end of May in 2020, monitored it throughout the summer, and we're very excited to see the seagrass expanding and growing. But by the end of September, our last monitoring event, We had seen the water level risen and the clarity was much lower. And unfortunately, we had lost most of the seagrass. So not great results on that project, but certainly learned that a lot can change in a short period of time. That winter of 2020, there was a very significant event that also brought light to our seagrass issues in the Indian River Lagoon and allowed for a lot of other funding opportunities to become available for seagrass restoration programs. And that was the manatee unusual mortality event. So we lost hundreds of manatees in the Indian River Lagoon across Florida due to starvation. So loss of seagrass habitat in the lagoon led to emaciation in manatees. The Brevard Zoo supported U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and FWC during the unusual mortality event on the supplemental feeding programs that they were conducting in the Indian River Lagoon, but we wanted to look for more ways to get involved in seagrass restoration and getting to the root of the problem of trying to bring seagrass back to the Indian River Lagoon to provide habitat for manatees. So we applied for more funding from the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program to construct a seagrass nursery in Melbourne Beach at the Hub SeaWorld Research Institute property. So in the fall of 2022, we started construction on a seagrass nursery at the Hub SeaWorld Research Institute, which, as you can see, is very close to the Indian River Lagoon. So the aerial image you can see we're located right on the lagoon. So we have the ability to use lagoon water in these tanks, which is very, very nice. So we constructed the seagrass nursery with the help of some amazing volunteers. And we finally finished construction in the late summer of 2023, so last year. And we received a permit from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Service to collect floating fragments of seagrass in the lagoon and transplant them into the nursery to provide a starter stock of seagrass that could be used in restoration purposes. So growing out seagrass within the nursery to plant in the Indian River Lagoon. And we chose one target species for the nursery, although we have grown a couple other species of seagrass in the lagoon. Over 90% of the seagrass in our nurseries is Haliduli right-eye or shoalgrass, which was the most common species of seagrass in our portion of the lagoon. And thankfully, with the return of seagrass, or start of return of seagrass in the Northern Banana River and the Northern IRL, we've had plenty of floating fragments to be able to collect and outplant in the nursery. So if you see my hand, the photo of my hand holding a fragment of seagrass, we're looking for pieces of seagrass fragments that contain not just roots, but also the blades or the leaves of the seagrass. And we're planting those into sediment in the tanks and then letting them grow out. So seagrass is not like some other plant species. They don't seem to flower or seed as regularly as other plants. So Haliduli, this species of seagrass, grows mostly through transplants. So we're able to just collect the live plants that are floating around in the lagoon and plant them into the nursery. And we've officially been operating the nursery at Hubs for about a year, and we've learned a lot in that time. So every season presents different challenges. We've had pumps break, we've had water overflow from the tanks, we've had temperatures in the tanks increase and decrease, and different algae pop up, and all of these things affect the growth of the seagrass. So certainly learning a lot over the past year. I'm not going to go into detail of like every single thing that's happened in the nursery, but we are growing grass. So we've certainly increased the amount of grass that we have in the nursery. So those transplants are growing. We're monitoring the grass as it's growing, and we're excited to be able to outplant it into the lagoon very soon. And I think it's also important to mention that we're very thankful for other nursery partners in Florida and other parts of the country that have collaborated with us and helped us learn about the nursery. So we didn't build it in a vacuum. We really had to talk to a lot of other people to get good ideas about how to build the nursery and good procedures at the nursery as well. So very, very thankful for all of those partners. So there again, as I mentioned, the UME really opened up a lot of funding opportunities for seagrass restoration on the lagoon. And another one of those opportunities was a request for qualifications that the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program put out in search of organizations that could help increase seagrass nursery capacity on the lagoon. So we had already secured funding for the construction of the seagrass nursery at Hubs. But we were selected as one of the 5 organizations to increase seagrass nursery capacity by the NEP. Which we're extremely thankful for. And this allowed us to build an additional nursery that this past year. So at the same time that we were wrapping up construction of the seagrass nursery at Hubs, we also built a second seagrass nursery in Rockledge across from Rockledge Gardens at Rockledge Gardens East. So very generous of the property owners to allow us space at this site to build a smaller nursery that's much closer to our office. So it's a very different system. At Hubs, we're able to, like I said, pull in lagoon water to be able to recirculate in those tanks. At this nursery, we have to create our own seawater. And we designed the nurseries very differently so that we could see, what methodologies work best. And so this is one large tank, one large grow out system. We've been growing the same species of seagrass within this system. But something that we've learned here is that the grass can be much more resilient than we think. So I think that's something that's kind of scary too. The seagrass in the lagoon, we've impaired our watershed so much that it's not as resilient in the lagoon, but we can have low clarity and low salinity in the tanks in our nurseries, and the seagrass will survive. So you can put it through a lot. So beyond our seagrass nurseries, we wanted to start to test some small pilot plantings. So with generous donations from zoo donors, we were able to plant seagrass in the spring of 2023 at 16 different sites throughout Brevard County. So you can see all of those sites on this map. They're color coded by basin of the Indian River Lagoon. So all the blue sites are in the North IRL basin. All the orange kind of coral sites are in the Banana River. And then all the green sites are in the Central Indian River Lagoon. And all of these sites were chosen based off of historic seagrass data that we have from St. John's River Water Management District. So these are all sites that historically had seagrass. So, have at one point in time had very good conditions for seagrass growth. Most of the sites did not have any existing seagrass coverage. If they did, it was very, very low density seagrass at these sites. And we did install exclusion devices to keep out herbivores on about half, or not about half, on exactly half of the planting units at all of these sites. So we got to work planting all 16 of these sites within 1 month in May of 2023, which was a very, very exciting time working with so many volunteers to plant seagrass within the lagoon. We chose the same species of seagrass that we have in both of our nurseries, Haliduli rhydi, because it's a pioneer species. So it can tolerate a wide variety of conditions, especially compared to some of our more picky species like Thalassia or Syringodium, turtle grass, and manatee grass, which are very picky about high salinity and light conditions. So we chose Haliduli for all of these projects. As you remember from earlier, we're still working on constructing our first seagrass nursery in Melbourne Beach. So we had to again partner with Florida Oceanographic Society to use seagrass from their established nursery to plant on these projects. And we used planting units that comprised of a landscape staple with shoots of haloduly, about 15 shoots of haloduly with the rhizome attached, so fragments. We attached those to the landscape staple using a ceramic coated wire. And each site had the same sampling design and experimental design. So we planted about 30,000 seagrass shoots across all of these sites. And again, all of this happened within 1 month. So it was a lot of work. We monitored all of these sites monthly for the first 6 months and then quarterly thereafter using 1 meter square quadrats and methods very similar to those that St. John's River Water Management District uses to monitor the seagrass resources that we have in the lagoon. And here are some of our results. So I'm really just going to talk about the first 6 months on these projects because we learned a lot within those first 6 months. And once we get past 6 months, we started to have some difficulty with excluders on projects. So the experimental design at all of them wasn't exactly the same because we had removed excluders at some sites and kept excluders behind at some sites. So this first box plot shows the percent occurrence of shoal grass in control plots and planted plots at all 16 of the sites. And the sites are listed from left to right, north to south. So SL is our northernmost site and SI is our southernmost site. And you can see that they're also color coded by basin and they match the map on the right. This next scatter plot, box plot, sorry, shows our percent occurrence of haloduly rhydi in excluded and non-excluded plots at those same sites. So excluded plots are those that have the exclusion device placed on them. So they're being protected from herbivores like manatees and sea turtles. And then that bottom is non-excluded. So we planted seagrass in those plots, but they didn't have an excluder. As you can see, we certainly had more seagrass growing in the planted plots versus the control plots. So yay, it worked. We were able to plant seagrass. And after 6 months, we had more seagrass within the planted plots than control plots. And then on that same token, we had more seagrass growing in the excluded plots than the non-excluded plots. So something we learned very, very quickly was that predation was very powerful on these projects. So for the remainder of the presentation, I'm just going to focus on the planted and excluded plots, so the protected planted plots, because that's where we learned the most. So as I said, we learned very quickly that one of our biggest hurdles on this project or on these projects and any future restoration projects in the Indian River Lagoon was going to be predation. So there are lots of things in the lagoon that want to eat seagrass and not very much seagrass for them to eat. So these photos on the left, the top left corner shows an excluded plot at a site in Titusville. After 9 months post-planting. So you can see very dense with underneath the excluders, and you can kind of see along the edges that there's not much seagrass growing outside the excluders. So the seagrass was trying to spread outside the excluder. We would see shoots starting to grow out there, but something was coming in and eating that seagrass. And then below it, you can see this is the exact same monitoring event, the exact same site, exact same planting density within these plots, but a plot that was not excluded. So did not have protection over it. And you can see how sparse the seagrass was growing. And we really saw that at a lot of the sites. Basically, every site that had dense seagrass growth did not have dense seagrass growth outside of the exclusion. So who's eating all of this seagrass? Lots of things want to eat seagrass, not just manatees and sea turtles. The exclusion devices that we were using had 6-inch wire mesh, so very large gaps. So they were certainly keeping out manatees and sea turtles, even stingrays that might mess with the grass. They might not be predating on the grass, but they could be disturbing it. It was keeping out large animals, but not necessarily keeping out smaller herbivores. So we definitely saw a lot of observations of a sheep's head and other small fish swimming in and around the exclusion devices. They could certainly get inside. And fish like sheep's head are known to consume seagrass. So it's certainly very possible that fish like this were the ones eating our seagrass plantings, but we still have a lot more to learn there. This next slide is a little bit overwhelming. It does show the percent occurrence of haliduli over time at all of our seagrass sites, all 16 of the sites, and they're broken up by basin. I wanted to share this not because I'm gonna go into detail about every single site, but just to show you how variable growing conditions were across all of the sites. So we had a lot of different stressors happening at every site. No two sites were the same. There was a different story at every site. So in the North IRL, we did have some very successful sites, and then we had some not so successful sites on either end of the Northern Indian River Lagoon. And then for the Banana River Lagoon, we had most of our sites were extremely successful, except for one, Tire City, which suffered from a lot of drift algae. And then in the Central Indian River Lagoon, we had very little success except for at one site. And we're still trying to figure out what set apart that one site. So lots of different stressors happening on this project. So how many stressors can the seagrass really overcome? Conditions are variable in the Indian River Lagoon, but seagrass can grow if multiple stressors are tolerable. So the St. John's River Water Management District has been monitoring seagrass in the lagoon for the past 30 years, and they've established stressors or thresholds for stressors on seagrass in the lagoon for salinity, temperature, and light, which I have displayed here on the left side of the screen. And we certainly saw our sites dipping below these thresholds or above these thresholds at different times. But some of them did okay, and sometimes there were multiple stressors on the seagrass at the sites, and that resulted in very little seagrass growth or success at these sites. So in the Banana River, we consistently had salinity below what is considered the threshold for salinity for seagrass growth in the lagoon. But we had consistently good light, good temperature, so we had lots of seagrass growing. So this photo in the middle of the screen is one of our sites in the Banana River at Carrs Park, so just north of the 528 causeway. But in the Central Indian River Lagoon, we had both low salinity, excuse me, and low light. So the seagrass couldn't tolerate both of these stressors at once. And so we did not have very significant growth at many of our sites in the Central Indian River Lagoon. But salinity and light were not the only stressors that we saw on seagrass in this project. Some of the and predation. So I already talked about predation being an important stressor on these projects, but macroalgae, different types of macroalgae growing amongst the seagrass was another stressor. So Caulerpa prolifera, which is very prolific in the Brevard County portion of the Indian River Lagoon. It's not a seagrass, although a lot of the public thinks it looks like a seagrass. It has those big, wide green blades. It was existing on several of the project sites, and we did our best to avoid it when planning the projects, but at the same time, we're really trying to capture what are the current conditions for seagrass growth in the lagoon. So we wanted to interplant within Caulerpa, and at the sites where we did interplant in very dense Caulerpa, we did not have significant seagrass growth. So I don't know, we're still learning, but it seems like the Caulerpa may have blocked sunlight from reaching the seagrass, or just outcompeted it. Can it grow much faster than the seagrass? And then we also had lots of drift algae at the site. So lots of different types of macroalgae blowing around on the lagoon. Sometimes it would get caught in the exclusion devices and again, block sunlight from reaching the seagrass. So you can't grow seagrass in a closet, but it really was very, very, very site dependent. But, we did monitor all of these projects quarterly up until 1 year, as I mentioned. I did mostly focus the data and results in this project on the 6 months, because like I mentioned, we removed excluders at several sites. So that kind of would have kind of muddied up the results a little bit had I share them. But I wanted to share these photos because they're very exciting. After the 1 year, we did go back and visit several of our sites that had significant seagrass growth to see how they would perform during peak growing season 1 year after the project. So after we had removed the exclusion devices, we went and revisited these sites. And when conditions are good, recovery can happen extremely fast. So the seagrass in these photos, I do not think came from what we planted. I think that's all natural recovery. So again, the photo on the left is a site in Banana River, Cars Park. And then the photo on the right is at a site in the Northern IRL Scottsmore. And what's incredible about the recovery that we've been seeing at some of these sites, especially Scottsmore, is that the Scottsmore site at the final monitoring, the 1 year monitoring that happened in late April of this year, the mean percent cover of Haladuli was only 1.7% across all of the plots. In just 3 months, when we came back and visited in July, over 90% cover of seagrass. So conditions were very, very good for seagrass to recover on its own. So the grass can grow very, very fast and is resilient, which is exciting. So with all of that, where did we go next? We don't have a lot of strong conclusions from our very first year of plantings, other than the fact that predation is very impactful on the projects. So how do we start to answer some more questions, tease out how to move forward? So we designed our projects for this year using funds from the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program to continue some of these pilot planting projects to answer several other questions. So what happens when we remove exclusion? So 2 of our sites this year, we included in the experimental design timed removal of the exclusion devices. So letting the seagrass grow under excluders for 3 months, removing the excluder and seeing what happens, letting the seagrass grow for 6 months under the excluder, removing the excluder and see what happens. Another question that we wanted to answer is, how does exclusion impact naturally recovering seagrass in control plots? So one of the things that I regret not including in our very first pilots was those control plots that we had at the sites. We did monitor them, but we never added exclusion devices to the control plots. So if there was existing grass or grass that recovered on its own within the control plots, we didn't get a chance to see how excluding that grass from predators would help in its recovery. So this year we did include exclusion devices on all of our control plots. And then finally, can increased planting density and additional exclusion improve success at sites with more stressors. So you remember a lot of our sites in the central Indian River Lagoon did not perform very well. We had some growth for the first couple of months, and then the grass was stressed with high water levels and low light, and we lost the grass. So can we plant at a higher density to get spread and establish the grass faster, and improve success or the ability for the grass to survive those stressors by increasing density and having more exclusion on the project? So if you look in the upper right-hand corner, that photo, you can see one of our fencing style exclusions that we included on 3 of our sites this year. So instead of the individual exclusion devices that were only about 1 meter squared, we actually fenced in the entire planting area, including the control plots. And so we planted all of those sites in May of this year, and we just wrapped up the 4-month monitoring on those projects. So still working through the data there, and I don't have a lot to share yet, but I did want to share some preliminary results and just some initial takeaways from the plantings so far. The biggest takeaway is that conditions can be very variable year to year. So we did replant at 3 of our sites from the initial last year's planting sites, and conditions have been very different. So I have some photos here of a site that Heather has actually visited many, many times. This is a site in Grant, Valcaria, that we were extremely excited about this year. So last year, you can see on the graph, the line in blue is the mean percent occurrence of Haladuli within the excluded planted plots last year. So after 3 months, there was no seagrass left at the site. So it had a very slow start, really didn't spread too much, and then we lost all of it after 3 months. This year, at the same site, we had much more growth. So it grew, the seagrass at this site grew very, very fast. Within 2 months, we had over 90% occurrence of Haladuli within the planted and excluded plots. And it was maintaining this coverage through the first 3 months. And we were very, very excited. So you see the beautiful growth of seagrass at this site in August of this year. And unfortunately, when we went back 2 weeks ago for the 4-month monitoring, we had no live blades of seagrass. So this just kind of goes back to my title. You know, it's not easy being green. Seagrass restoration in the lagoon is not easy. And we have really high highs, like seeing all this amazing growth in a short period of time, and really low lows like this one, where we had catastrophic loss at a site in just 4 weeks. And that's really because, you know, our water quality conditions have not improved in certain areas of the lagoon where seagrass restoration may be ready, or, you know, it may work 1 year but not work another year. So this site is an unfortunate example of that, but just goes to show that conditions really are still very variable, and we need to keep continuing to work on projects that improve water quality conditions in the lagoon. But much more to learn for the rest of the year. So as we move forward, what do we really want to work on in the future? Additional review and analysis of existing data. So the data from last year's plantings and the data from this year's plantings. And we're really hoping to incorporate data that we've collected with continuous water quality sensors in the lagoon. It's just a lot of data mining, a lot of going through that data, cleaning it up so that we can start to answer questions, you know, why did seagrass do well at certain sites and not at others? We have assumptions. So at that site in Grant, we had a much slower start to our rainy season this year. So we do predict that it was rising water levels at that site. I think we had probably a change in almost a third of a meter or half a meter in just 4 weeks at that site. And that would significantly impact sunlight's ability to reach the bottom of the lagoon and the seagrass growing at that site. So that could be why we lost so much in such a short period of time. But it probably had to do with multiple stressors there. We're also working on a project with University of Central Florida and Florida Institute of Technology, investigating interactions between Caulerpa prolifera and Haliduli rhydi at our seagrass nursery, and also out in the Indian River Lagoon coming this spring. So spring of 2025, our plantings are going to be focused within areas that have Caulerpa prolifera to try to tease out what impacts those two species have on each other. And that project has been funded by Moat Marine Laboratory. We also want to continue answering questions that help to guide future restoration work. So, I feel like every project we do, every site, there's new questions that come up. And it feels like, you're like always chasing this like never ending carrot of trying to figure out how to move forward. But that's science. And then we also want to increase our seagrass cultivation at both of our seagrass nurseries. So after having them for 1 year and going through all of the seasons and the different challenges that we face each season, we wanted to continue to refine our methods there and hopefully be able to grow even more seagrass that we can use on these pilot planting projects. So finally, how can you get involved in these projects? So as Heather mentioned, there's lots of opportunities for volunteers to get involved with the Restore Our Shores program. And you can visit our website, which is restoreourshores.org. We have a volunteer page and that lists all of our open volunteer opportunities for the next couple of weeks. If you don't see something on there or you're really interested in getting involved at our seagrass nurseries, there's opportunities that we don't post to the public on the website. So please visit the website and email our Restore Our Shores email if you're interested in like helping with monitoring or as I mentioned at the nursery to help us grow seagrass in the nursery. Other ways that you can help these projects are really just to make lagoon-friendly choices at home and when you're out on the water. So consider adding native plants to your landscaping to reduce fertilizer usage that may run off into the lagoon. I feel like I don't need to go down like a laundry list of lagoon-friendly choices at home, but something important for seagrass too, in these areas where we're starting to see seagrass recover, please be mindful of where you're anchoring your boat or how you're recreating out on the lagoon so that we can help protect the seagrass that's starting to come back. And finally, please support lagoon restoration so that water quality conditions continue to improve. If we continue doing the hard work to support funding for big infrastructure projects that reduce nutrient pollution in the lagoon, we will start to see seagrass come back. It's going to take time. We can't plant our way out of the problem. So water quality really is the root of bringing seagrass back. And just a big thank you to all of the project collaborators, my partners, my colleagues at the zoo, and then colleagues outside of the zoo as well. And then, of course, our funding partners, the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. And with that, I think I'm happy to take any questions that may have come up.
Thank you so much, Olivia. We know that you are enthusiastic. I am enthusiastic. I think everyone on this call is enthusiastic. But what I really appreciate was the fact that you are not scared to show the real data about what's happening. You go out to one site 1 month and it looks so amazing. You can't wait to share it with everyone. You go out a mere 4 weeks later and we saw, what you showed us. And so thank you for being brave enough to share all of that. We always encourage folks to think about, the results as learning opportunities rather than
Mhm.
successes and failures. So what did we do that worked so well this time? What happened? Was it something that we did, or was it the stressors that you were talking about? So thanks for sharing that. I think it's important.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um,
And I think we're in each of the projects where, you know, we can't always overcome the stressors. We can't control for the stressors. We can try to pick sites that we think will have very few stressors. But we're also trying to pick sites that have these stressors because that's where the seagrass needs to come back. So it's not always sunshine and rainbows. When it is, it's exciting. But when it's not, we're learning. So.
Right. And to that effect, we have some online curiosity about when you were mentioning how extreme the variables can affect
Mhm.
those restoration projects. Could you explain some of the parameters when you are evaluating and then actually selecting sites for seagrass, including those that might not be optimal? Because I don't want folks to, think that you're being wasteful with energy, time, resources, money. So can you explain those kind of parameters when evaluating and selecting the sites?
So the initial project, the project that we completed last year with the 16 sites, each site historically did have seagrass, significant seagrass coverage, and is located very close to one of the seagrass transects that St. John's River Water Management District monitors every year. So it's in an area of historic seagrass coverage. So we knew that at some point in time, there was seagrass at these locations. We planted seagrass really on the shallower end of the depth of growing, the ideal depth zone for seagrass growth in the lagoon, which is about 1/2 meter to just under a meter. All of the sites were planted at about 1/2 meter. So we tried to be cautious on the shallower end, knowing that clarity conditions on the lagoon are not what they were in 2009 when we had all this seagrass, and we established those depth target zones for seagrass. So we tried to err on the side of caution by planting a little bit shallower at these sites to increase light penetration on the bottom. But for the most part, we didn't exclude sites that we thought would have stressors in that initial project because we were trying to learn from those stressors. I mean, we may have excluded projects that had a stormwater outflow like right in
Right.
front of where we were going to plant. But if we knew, yes, this area is close to a tributary like Turkey Creek, that may have a lot of fresh water coming out of the tributary. At one point in time, there was seagrass here, so it was able to survive those stressors. We wanted to see those stressors. I hope that kind of answers that question.
Yeah.
This year, we were more specific about where we planted. We didn't want to plant at sites where we're having like tons of natural recovery because what's the point to learn there?
Mhm.
So we actually did plant at some sites that I would consider to have more stressors than our sites last year because we're trying to capitalize on these marginal areas. Can we adjust planting methodologies and designs to be able to overcome these stressors?
And other than the excluder devices, what kind of adjustments have you considered making, or what have you made?
Other than exclusion devices, so trying to overcome the stressor of predation, which is variable throughout the lagoon. So some sites we had predation even under the excluders, much
Yeah.
heavier than other areas, especially like farther south. I'd say in the IRL. One thing that we did differently this year was increase seagrass planting density at 3 of our sites in the central Indian River Lagoon. So those were areas where we really struggled to establish seagrass last year. So we were hoping that by increasing the initial planting density, we could establish the grass quicker. And then maybe they could overcome those stressors, be prepared and resilient to those stressors. Unfortunately, we have not seen that on the
Mhm.
projects. 2 of the sites in the central Indian River Lagoon did very, very well for the first 2 or 3 months of growth. And then, as you see at that site in Grant, still could not overcome those stressors. So,
Yeah. A moment ago, you were mentioning a lot of natural recovery in limited areas of the lagoon and some small recovery in other places too. So how might you respond to those who state, well, a natural recovery is happening, so there's really not a need to supplement with the plantings?
We're seeing natural recovery happening, but not everywhere in the lagoon. So, especially in central Brevard County, we have I really haven't seen any recovery in that area. And I visit a lot of sites, not just on seagrass restoration projects, but oyster and clam restoration projects too. So, my hope is that seagrass continues to grow so much in the Northern Banana River and the Northern IRL and, farther south around the Sebastian Inlet, that we have so much seagrass growing that there are fragments widely available that are spreading all over the lagoon, but unfortunately that's not the case yet.
Yeah.
So especially in these areas in central Brevard where we're really not seeing any recovery, that may be because the supply of fragments is limited. How can a fragment make it all the way from Scottsmore down to Melbourne? If there's nothing left, there's nothing to contribute to that population. And it's been over 10 years, or not over 10 years, but close to 10 years, or without seagrass. So there's really not much in terms of a seed bank left, likely. Yeah.
What would you consider to be the key milestones or, success indicators for the project, knowing that success for the project doesn't necessarily mean a big, beautiful bed of seagrass?
I think key milestones are learning something. Like every
Yes.
time we learn something that changes the way we do things moving forward, that to me is success. So last year, and learning, okay, yes, we really can't establish seagrass right now outside of these exclusion devices because there's very few seagrass, there's very little seagrass outside of the plots. So this year, all of our plantings, we were using exclusion devices. That's one example of like a big milestone. So learning something that changes the way we do things moving forward, that you would hope would improve success. But of course, because conditions are variable, it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah. Can you imagine like a high school student trying to do this as a science fair project with all, so many variables?
Yeah, it's a
Um,
lot.
what is the best way that the general public can keep themselves updated about the information that we're learning in seagrass restoration projects?
Best way for the public to stay informed.
I mean, will
I'd
you have
love,
online resources
yeah.
available, public meetings,
So
those sorts of things?
I think one of the best resources really is the National Estuary Program. I think you guys do a great job of sharing, sometimes what the organizations can't share on their own or don't have time to share on their own. And then, resources like this, like webinars where people are providing the most up-to-date information and making it or presenting it in a very tangible, understandable form versus like a white paper report.
Right.
So, there are resources on the Restore Our Shores website, but it only gets updated ever so often. And I think another, always email me. Like if people have specific questions about the project, like I am happy to answer very specific questions about very specific sites. It takes a little bit of effort. But yeah, my best suggestion would be to follow the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program on all their socials. And then, come out and volunteer with us, email me. Yeah.
Thank you. I had already put your email address in the chat and I put the Restore Our Shores website in the chat. So hopefully folks will have a chance to copy those down. Do you see any other like complementary restoration projects happening with, for example, I know that another project for Restore Our Shores was working with clams and working with oyster reefs. Can you tell us a little bit about those and how they might complement the seagrass restoration?
Yeah, so the Brevard Zoo has constructed over 90 oyster reefs in Brevard County since 2014, and we have a lot more oyster restoration projects planned. We've also planted over 10 million clams in the Indian River Lagoon. So working to bring our natural filter feeders back that will help to improve water quality in the lagoon. We have not done any projects where we specifically paired, like, building an oyster reef in front of where we're planting seagrass to try to protect that seagrass. Other organizations have. We've not like co-planted clams with seagrass. Other organizations have. So I feel like we don't really want to like reinvent the wheel. But the reason we're trying to bring back these filter feeders is to improve water quality in the lagoon that will in turn help seagrass. So improving clarity, removing nitrogen and phosphorus through assimilation into both oyster or clam shells, and then the denitrification process that both of these species help to promote in the sediment can help improve seagrass growth.
Because it helps with water clarity
Yeah.
by helping reduce the severity and occurrence of the algal blooms.
Yeah. So we don't have any like specific paired projects, but I feel like overall, and it's so hard to monitor specific impacts at like one site because
Mhm.
there is so much water turnover in the lagoon, lots of mixing, very well mixed estuary. So it's hard to see, I have homeowners who we build an oyster reef off their dock and they're like, I swear it's clearer. And I'm like, I don't know. But
Time
that's
will
okay.
tell.
Time will tell. So yeah, it's difficult, but I commend other organizations that are doing the work to try to like specifically pair other resource restoration projects together.
And how did you settle on the method for the landscaping staple?
So that's a great question. We reviewed lots of different seagrass restoration projects, especially in the state of Florida, and several projects that were designed by FWC had used the landscape staple with a lot of success. And then a master's student at the University of Central Florida, Gabe Benson, he had done a pilot project in Mosquito Lagoon comparing the landscape staples to, I think, bare root planted fragments of seagrass, and then the burlap mats. So weaving seagrass fragments into burlap mats and planting those. And he had the most success with the staples. So that's why we chose the staples. And it was really nice to be able to engage the community in helping us prepare the restoration materials. So that could be done on land, on the boat, people, many different abilities were able to help with those projects, even though they couldn't physically plant the
Right.
seagrass on the bottom of the lagoon with us.
In the
So that was
in the
special.
shade, even sitting down on a table. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Listening to some good music.
Pretending like they have mustaches. Yes,
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a fun way to keep everybody involved.
Mhm.
Olivia, I don't know if you have some closing words for us, but I want to thank you for all your time and enthusiasm and your whole team really doing just amazing things. And I hope that everyone on the webinar has a chance to get out there in some form or fashion with Restore Our Shores. We are cheerleaders of yours and can't say enough good things about what's happening with you guys.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. And, thank you to the entire Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program for supporting a lot of these projects. I feel like I was like a broken record, and with help from the NEP, but really like none of these projects are possible without you guys. So it has been amazing learning so much about these projects. And I hope this presentation didn't seem so doom and gloom because we really have had some really exciting success at several sites. And I hope that that came across in this and that we really are learning something. But I think really at the end of the day, I hope that people understand that we have to continue improving water quality in the lagoon. As amazing as these projects are, and as much as they help to highlight the need to improve water quality, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, and that's what's going to help bring seagrass back. So.
Right. Very good point. Thank you for always reminding folks of that for sure. You have
Yeah.
had several compliments, many thank yous kind of between the chat and the questions that are happening. In fact, you've even been called a rock star and a seagrass champion, and
Oh.
people are thanking you for that. So thank you so much. And what an amazing way to start the celebration of National Estuaries Week, but with
Yeah.
Olivia from Restore Our Shores.
Well, thank you all.
And I just want to remind everyone that you will be getting a survey. We are trying to host What's Up in the Watershed once a month, and we'd love to know what topics everyone else is interested in as well. Please stay tuned. If you don't already subscribe to our quarterly newsletter, you can send me or Aaron in our offices an email, and we can get you on that quarterly newsletter list. And as Olivia was saying, we do a lot of our communication through social media, and we try to keep very active with that. So if you aren't already, please consider following us on one of our social media channels as well. I just want to thank everyone for being here today.